Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm City Councilor David Lowe, Chair of the Finance Administration Committee. We're having our meeting today, June 1st, 2022. And with me in the City Hall is City Councilor Ruth Causey. Mayor Chaz Jones is here virtually. Eugene, we've got City Manager Chris Workman, Finance Director Mike Brzezinski, and we have Jerry Forte from the Corvallis Benton County Economic Development Office. Sorte, I'm sorry, apologize. Forte. Ready.
He doesn't mind Forte, I'm sure.
Okay. So the first order of business is acceptance of our minutes from February 23rd, 2022. Do we have any questions or motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. So, motion by Mayor Jones and second by Councilor Causey. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. It's motion is passed. We're good to go there. So we have a couple of old business matters. The first is our social service funding policy review, and we are looking at this now. Our inclusivity committee, ad hoc inclusivity committee, has taken a look at this policy that originated. Let's see, where did I have it? Oh, yeah, so the original policy, was adopted in October 9th, 2000, revised in 2002, and again in 2012. And we're looking at it to revise it again. This will be the committee's recommendations that we arrive at here will be brought to City Council at our next meeting. I know that I had a number of questions and thoughts about this as I went through it. And I'm thinking that maybe if we just go through it section by section to highlight those items would be the best way to do it. So we have the purpose of the policy, which is to formally establish a policy for the allocation of social service funding and to specify the annual allocation amount, establish criteria. Is there any additional wording that we want there? Looks good.
Yeah.
Everybody? Okay. We have a mission for the policy. I'm not going to necessarily read this all. The committee members have this. Is there anything to the mission that we should be looking at in terms of addition or subtraction?
Just a general question.
Sure.
The only changes are those which are highlighted here. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So what we have in our package, the changes that are shown are from our inclusivity committee.
Correct.
The other languages, what was existing prior to their taking a look at it. Yep. Thank you for that question.
Sure.
Okay. So mission seems to be all right. Next item we have is funding source. And I just had more of a grammatical reading thing. It says to provide a stable funding source for social service agencies. Since the introduction really is funding source, I'm just wondering if it's necessary to repeat the word source. So I was going to suggest to provide stable funding for social service agencies. It's just.
I was going to comment on that same part of the sentence.
Sure.
And it seems to me that our funding isn't really intended to provide a stable funding source for social service agencies because it's such a small amount of money relative to what their overall budgets must be. I wonder if it's more that we're trying to provide stable service. We're trying to provide services from the city to support that social service. Sorry, people, I guess, I'll have to think about it a little bit, but that's kind of the line of thinking that I have right now.
What would you think of using the word supplemental funding source instead of stable?
I think that would be better. And I think it would be nice if we kind of reference, well, I guess that it's already referenced in the mission. So I think that would be good.
I concur with that. Thank you for bringing that up, because this is really an allocation of money that we're providing agencies that really do help the city go about its business, where we don't have to actually spend that money on our own payroll or provide that directly. So provide a supplemental funding source for social service agencies.
You want source of there still? You want to remove source?
The other question is, do we really need the statement that says to provide? Because the reason that we're doing it is actually in the mission, rather than really having to justify that again.
Okay. What would you suggest for wording then?
We could simply start at the city will annually budget up to 35% of.
Okay. So the city will annually budget up to 35% of estimated state revenue sharing monies for social service requests as a supplemental source of funding for those agencies. Or is that, it's a little redundant.
I just leave it in that sentence.
Okay,
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking.
stated above already.
excellent. Okay,
Okay.
so, got it. Then we had the one other sentence talking about how the formula may be modified at any time, suspended. I think that can stay in there. Okay. So under setting priorities, this is one where I had thoughts, a number of changes, other folks might too. One thing was just sort of a grammatical thing again, where the city council will, everywhere else we talk about shall review or shall do something. So I think for consistency, will should be shall. So overall, I'm thinking we talk about priorities. We mentioned priorities in a number of different sort of ways and throughout this body of it. And we talk about social service priority funding being included in those strategies in a strategic plan. That can be the case, I guess. But then we talk about city funding priorities, and this is the addition from the Inclusivity Committee, specifically outlining, I think, values or standards of review that we'd want to have. So I'm wondering if city funding priorities include, the word priority should be some other word. And in my mind, I was thinking, well, maybe city funding evaluation criteria might be that. Priorities coming from our strategic plan, what council and city management have decided upon is what the city needs. I think those would be from our priorities, would be our priorities. And where it talks about strategies, those strategies found in the strategic plans, we don't really say strategy, I think, in there. We have themes, we have goals, objectives. So for consistency, I think we might just say themes. What do you?
Yeah, I need to go a step further. I don't know that we could say our strategic plan specifically calls out all of the different social services that we want to support.
Right.
And so to reference the strategic plan as the place we're going to look to for what we're going to fund doesn't seem to make sense. So I think you could strike out a lot of that and just have it be, you know, current social service funding priorities include : and start your bullet points and just really remove any reference to the Philomath strategic plan in there, strategies, et cetera. I think you just go with the include, and then you can work on the bullet points
Mhm.
on what are the funding, social service funding priorities.
Right. Though, wouldn't the strategic plan through the theme sort of represent, it would touch on those elements that maybe social service agencies could help the city achieve or promote or whatever. But, and do you know why the inclusivity committee added strategic plan specifically here?
I think because before it referenced
Specific agencies,
Yeah.
they thought that was limiting. maybe?
Council of Governments, Elder Nutrition Program, Philomath Community Services. So I think it was, and I think it was a reference to city council goals.
Mhm.
And so those council goals that, council goals every 2 years have kind of been replaced by the strategic plan. So I think that's where they were looking to, is what's in the strategic plan. So,
Councilor Kazi. You can
It
just kick
seems to me that even though the strategic plan may not outline the social service agencies that we want to focus on, it does outline the goals we want to try and accomplish. So it seems to me that these priorities could encompass the goals outlined, or could incorporate or reflect the goals that are outlined in the strategic plan. But it seems to me that these priorities are really almost, and I think you touched on this, David, I think they're almost characteristics of the organizations that we would want to prioritize.
Right.
so social service funding opportunities from, or that, what was the word you said, reflected in the strategic
Current
plan?
social service funding priorities should reflect the goals found in the Philomath strategic plan.
I do like that reference to the strategic plan, because I think, in my mind, a lot of what we do as counselors is to have some work, some body that we can go back to, or touchstone to say, this is what we put together as our long range plan. Let's reference back to it. So I like that.
One
Okay.
thing that jumps out at me, and I'm just thinking about this, is this reference to the providing responsible stewardship of land, air, and waters.
Mhm.
I guess I don't know that this particular source of social service funding is something that we should be doing to, renovate our parks or something, or do plantings. I don't know.
And on that one, I didn't like the word providing. I thought, well, promoting maybe, but it is broad. I mean, for me, I can kind of get my head around the others bullet items, but not really sure. What do you think?
Well, I can see where we would want, if we're selecting organizations that we're going to provide funding to, we would want them to exhibit these characteristics to the extent they can. So, for example, if we're going to provide funding to the food bank, or to PYIC, we would want to know that their board was diverse and that in their distribution or discarding, dated food items, that they would do so in an environmentally responsible way. So I don't think it's inappropriate to have it here. There are certainly organizations to which it probably would not apply or apply extensively, but I think it's appropriate to have it here. One thing I would suggest is that the incorporating practices of equity, inclusion, and diversity be included as the fourth item instead of the first item, because these these social service agencies exist to help with homelessness or to help with food insecurity or to help with whatever. And certainly they should incorporate practices of equity, inclusion, and diversity, but that's not why they exist.
It almost kind of ties in with the last bullet point of providing responsible stewardship of land areas. So you almost kind of group those first three, like this is what we're targeting. And then it could be a separate sentence maybe that even says recipients of funds should, to the greatest extent possible, incorporate practices of equity, inclusion, and promote responsible stewardship of land, air, and water. So it's really kind of two separate things, trying to merge it into one set of bullet points, but really you're talking about two different.
Well, I would keep them separate because I think the practices of equity, inclusion, and diversity should be achievable or demonstrable by any organization.
And
As opposed to responsible stewardship of land, air, and water.
Well, I don't see PYAC as a big polluter, frankly. Maybe they are, but I don't know.
spitting out their gum or what?
Then, so I'm just running this through. If Mary's River Watershed wanted to do a riparian planting, would that be something that we might consider funding under this policy?
That's where I struggle a little bit, because really intent of this has always been social service funding, right? Like for social services, and I see, as much as I might support that with some other types of funds, I don't see that those projects should compete with helping with homelessness issues and helping, those true social service funding source. So I'd hate to incorporate too much of this funding, because then it's all going to compete with the same funds. We're not getting a lot more money here. So now you're just talking about less money to everybody.
That's a really valuable point.
So I think if you keep those three, so not the first one, but the second, third, and fourth bullet point, I think if those become bullet points 1, 2, and 3, and then you have a second sentence, something like, recipients of these funds should incorporate the following into their practices, and then you could have bullet point number 1, incorporating practices of equity, inclusion, diversity. Bullet point number 2, provide reasonable stewardship. Now you're kind of separate, like we want to fund these types of things, and the recipient should do these 2 things. Does that make sense?
It does. I like that delineation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we don't need to say wordsmith that here. Let me do that at the staff level. Let me wordsmith that, get that out, and I can kick it back out to you. Maybe just get individual feedback, and then we can bring it to the council, because we have more deliberation on this. I mean,
Sure.
I don't want to wordsmith too much here and go to the council and get wordsmithed again. So
Right.
Let me see if we can get there close. I can send it out to you, get thumbs up, and then let's get it in front of the city council as we've talked about here and see what their take is on it.
And I'm just going to note that absent from here, I mean, it says basic services, but we don't talk about food security. We don't talk about physical or mental health. I know it's probably under improving health and wellness, but I don't know. I'm just thinking here, like activities, efforts, or community social service. Yeah, CSC, electricity. But anyway, it's probably all covered under basic services. I just wanted to mention it.
No, I think those are good. I think they should be mentioned.
You want to add those as separate bullet points in that first set of bullet points?
Or under improving health and wellness, including food insecurity and mental health services.
Okay.
One thing that came to mind when I read the first bullet is how would the organization demonstrate that they are? What evidence would they have to show of incorporating those practices?
When the inclusivity committee talked about that, it was going to be up to them to show us what that meant, because we didn't want to disqualify somebody because they weren't, but we definitely want to encourage and see them make efforts to show that they're making efforts there, but they didn't want to be too scriptive.
Okay, good.
They didn't want this to be a disqualifier. They wanted it to be an encouragement for organizations maybe aren't quite where they would like to be, to give them additional encouragement to get there.
Okay.
Chad, is that about right? You were in those inclusivity committee meetings? Yep.
Thanks, Chaz. So the remaining open from 4 to 6 weeks, was there any particular reason there was a range inclusivity committee suggested?
No, I just
I mean-
said put it at a minimum of 4 weeks, and maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but a minimum
Yeah.
of 4 weeks makes sense.
Okay. That's good. And then just be open as to how long we might want to go out.
Yeah, depending on the meeting date.
So one thing that I noticed that it seemed to come up in prior discussions about how this money, how we approached, how we got the agencies we did for to know about the RFP was, well, who do we contact and how do we know, how do we get a hold of everybody? So I'm wondering if there needs to be anything in here about solicitation efforts, how we go about soliciting these RFPs. And just, I don't know, I mean, I'm thinking that's something that would be good for the policy, just
I agree.
to obviate, a problem down the road.
Could it be the same? Could we just restate however we put out our public information notices now? And just use the exact same language?
We can, yeah.
Would that-
One of the issues we ran into before was we just had this established group of agencies we just continued to go back to every year because we knew that what they did and everything, but I think it is valid that there can be other ones that maybe we don't include in the process, so we should do that. But I mean, how much effort do we go out beating the bushes for someone to come and apply for something?
Okay, let me pull something together. I hate to get to where we're like publishing
Right.
GT or, where we're now taking money out of it. But I think we can come up with a list. I'll work with the city recorder. We'll come up with a list of, again, what we do for typical, like a public meeting, maybe more typical for like a public hearing. I don't see doing like mailings or anything like that, but we definitely post in non-conspicuous places and put on the website and those types of things. So we'll come up with a list and just include some language in there.
Okay, great. The only other change that I had is in the very last sentence of the policy now, where it just says city council has sole authority to approve, deny, or modify the funding request made by any applicant at the time of budget adoption. I think budget adoption isn't here, be the council's at the council's discretion. I mean, budget, yeah, we approved the 35% as part of the budget, but when it actually comes down to here are the applicants and breakdown of the money, council decides at that point.
Oh, I see what you're
Yeah,
saying.
does that make
Yes.
sense?
So just strike at the time of budget.
Yeah.
I only had one minor change, which is the last bullet on the first page. I believe it should be plural, the city priorities, because there's probably more than one
Oh.
priority.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Is that a
Mr.
review first bullet point,
The last bullet.
last bullet point?
Yeah.
Got it.
Mr. Mayor, was there anything else that you had on this policy?
Nope, that all sounds great to me. I appreciate everyone's input on that.
Okay. So I heard one other thing about it though. So we actually do two kind of social service things. We have this, but then we also have the rental assistance that comes out of the water funds, right? There's two, the fish and we work or somebody.
Vina Moses.
Vina Moses, yes, thank you. So do we need a policy specifically for that? Because I think that's been a point of confusion in the past where we've got this 35% that goes here, da, 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 but yet we have this other little group that comes out of different funds. So,
We have a policy. Because that's based on need.
right,
Usually it's the utility customers.
right, And I think the idea there was these agencies help the city with low income people trying to pay their water bill. So by giving some money through these agencies, they then will work with folks that are having trouble paying their water bill and assist them. So kind of as a circuitous thing, but
I'll just add that into this policy, just fold it in, just have another
Sure.
separate section about
Mhm.
utility assistance. And
Yeah.
we'll just put it in there.
that sounds right.
But yeah, just to clarify, those two agencies don't actually apply to the city, do they? Or are they automatically given funding if it's available?
They apply similar to the social service agencies.
They do.
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
They report on how many customers they've served and, yeah.
Okay.
they do.
But now the dollar amount that's available, though, how does that determine? It's not just 35%.
Based on what we did last year. So, yeah, we should put that in the policy.
Yeah, we need to have, how does this money get?
Let me do a little bit of digging on that without Joan here. I don't know how much that number has fluctuated over the years or not. So we'll do some research
Okay.
and bring something back that makes sense. We can debate it with the council.
Okay, great, thank
So
you.
will
Yeah.
we see another version of this before it goes to the council?
I can get it out to you ahead of time. I'd really,
Or do you need to get it to the council?
well, our issue is our social service agencies are waiting on funding.
Right.
Typically used to getting those checks in July.
Okay.
So I'd like to just get this in front of the council.
Mhm.
So we can work this, I mean, we can kind of prioritize this for this week and try to get it back out to you fairly quick. I think we'll just get individual input, anything major that doesn't reflect what we talked about here. And then let's just save the discussion, I think, till we get in front of the council. So
Okay.
maybe the motion tonight on here is to kind of approve it with the modifications made
Mhm.
and just a recommendation to consider additional changes at the council level rather than to approve, because you haven't seen it yet.
Okay, and I do like a recommendation that in the agenda item summary about the timeframes that are involved.
Okay.
That works for me. Okay, so Councilor Cosby, would you like to make a motion or?
I would like to make a motion.
Thank you, thank you.
You're a mind reader, David. I move to approve the social service funding policy changes as discussed and with incorporating recommended changes and then forwarding those changes to the city council for approval.
I think I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay,
Thank you, Your Honor.
motion by Councilor Cosby, seconded by Mayor Jones. And all in favor? And
Aye.
aye. Opposed? None? Thank you. We're ready to go on that one.
Good feedback, thank you.
Thank you. So the next one, and we've talked about this before a little bit, is the transient lodging tax TLT policy and grant program. I don't believe we've had a policy before, but the agenda item summary says it is modeled after the policy formatting that we just talked about, which I think makes sense generally. So under purpose and mission, is there, since it is specific to TLT, is there anything here that anyone feels should be modified?
May I ask a clarifying question first?
Yes.
There is on the agenda item summary, DOR has made a recommendation to change one small section of the ordinance. What was that?
So in the model ordinance, there's some brackets where you insert city information here, right?
Yeah.
So on one of those inputs, I inputted finance director to be the person that, I forget the exact portion. There's one section of where it says they need to be able to, I think it's collect or modify or something, and there were the open brackets there, and I inserted finance director in those open brackets. They came back, they want to say finance director or Department of Revenue, because they need to be able to do that if they're collecting funds for us. That's an
Oh.
extension of the agreement that we need to allow them to also interact with and reach out to those individuals. So it's really just adding finance director and Department of Revenue onto that section. But if we don't have that in there, it doesn't allow them to do some of the work that we would need them to contract to do. So we'll bring that back at your next meeting. We'll just make that adjustment, but it's fairly minor.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's minor in the number of words, it's fairly major in what it allows the Department of Revenue to do on our behalf.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So back to the draft of the policy. Under funding source, I'm wondering if
David,
there's,
if I could real quick.
oh yeah, sorry.
On mission, I'll just jump in.
Yep.
And just, so in case it's not very clear, we're gonna get the transit lodging tax dollars, so I anticipate those are coming in, but I also anticipate that at times we'll apply for grants and other things, and so I didn't want to limit it to just transit lodging tax dollars.
Okay.
So that's why I've got this little caveat on here, and other tourism-related funds. Those could come from anywhere, right? And so this policy would be good for not just TLT funds, but any tourist-related funds that come towards the city. This would be the policy on how we allocate those funds.
Okay. And that would be sort of covered by the title where we add on and grant program. So the expense. Okay. Makes sense. So funding source, when we talk about the city receiving the small annual portion from Benton County, we can use the city's discretion. That's great. But then below, towards the end, it talks about the annual allocation of Benton County is likewise restricted, which is likewise being the stuff before that, about 70% and so on. So that seems to negate.
Should be is not likewise restricted. Sorry, that's just a typo.
Okay.
And location finger is not likewise restricted, but should be used for the tourist-related project it is intended for.
Okay. That takes care
Do
of
you need
that.
the word likewise in there?
Yeah. It's not.
Well, because I've just referenced that the TLT dollars coming to the city is restricted,
Mhm.
70/30. So
Okay.
then I'm trying to counter that by saying the Benton County funds are not likewise restricted,
Hmm.
but should be used, and this word is kind of funky too, but should be used for tourist-related, maybe project or projects
Projects.
it is
Mhm.
intended for. So maybe a parentheses S after project.
Yeah, a little awkward, but
Yeah.
okay, well, that answers that. Under setting priorities, there are a number of bullets here about how funds might be allocated. I had a question under the third one, says 50% of the funds received through the city's TLT and county's allocation will be reallocated to the tourism grant program to be awarded. So what's the other 50%? Where does that go?
So I'm seeing it as so you've got, so the grant program is the money that the city would set aside to be distributed out to other organizations that are doing tourism related work. So that's the grant program,
Right.
right? So this is saying that, I'm doing my math here. So let me start with the first couple bullet points.
Mhm.
So it makes sense to me, but I'm getting to the third one.
Sure.
100% of the funds received through the city's TLT will be used to fund tourism promotion or tourism activities. So the state allows us to do a 70-30 split where 30% of that can just go into the general fund and support general fund efforts.
Mhm.
My recommendation of this policy is that 100% of the TLT money goes to tourist related activities, and we don't use that 30% we could use for general fund. We don't use it for general fund, like we don't use it to support police or parks. We use TLT dollars for tourism related activities,
Right.
period. That's a judgment call. That could go down to as low as 70%. I'm saying let's do 100%, but that's up for discussion.
Mhm.
100% of the funds received through the county's allocation also be used. And then of that, so 100% of it's for tourism related. 50% of the funds received through both the city's TLT and the money that we get from the county will go into the tourism grant program. That's 50% of those funds are going to be given away to other organizations. The other 50% the city's going to keep, and we're going to use for our own tourism related activities.
Okay.
So if we want to do signage in the downtown area, we want to, anything that's going to support tourism that the city has as a city project, we're going to keep 50% of the funds for city projects, 50% of the funds. And again, I just put these numbers in here now, placeholders.
Right.
50% would go towards the grant program, to go to other agencies, 50% would stay in-house, and we would use them within our own budget.
And just curious, it's not really germane, but accounting wise, how, so this gets set up, there's a, in general fund money or?
Right now it
Mm.
comes,
Would it be
so right
general
now it comes into the general fund and it's in the city council discretionary funds as a tourism line item.
Okay,
And they need to put it in a special revenue.
We probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah, next year.
Yeah.
Have it come in as special revenue.
yeah.
Question, Chris, what's your thought process behind 100%? Why not give yourself some flexibility and say up to 100%? But
I'm fine with up to 100%. It's kind of like the 35% of that. I mean, it could be 100% as well, right? Like all of the money we get from the state on shared revenue goes towards social service funding. Well, we've said 35% because we want some of it to support the general fund. It doesn't have to. That's just the number that the council picked and we've just stuck with it to have it make sense. I'm same thing. If the money, I guess I would make the argument if I'm a hotel or I'm an RV owner, RV park owner, and I'm collecting all of this money from everybody who's coming and putting heads in beds and staying the night and they're paying this fee,
Mhm.
how much of that should go towards helping pay for the police department or the parks or the city manager's salary versus how much of it should be collected and go towards improvements to tourism related activities, which is who the money's getting pulled from, is the tourists that are coming to town. So I guess in principle, yeah, the state allows you to capture 30% of that for general fund, which is nice and would help the general fund. But I mean, this is gonna sound bad. Right now, our general fund's not hurt. We're not scrimping on our general fund, but we could definitely use, at least right now, policy wise, we could definitely use some improvements on our tourist related activities. So 100% towards tourist related activities makes sense right now. 10 years from now, it might be different.
I'm just thinking of if I'm a tourist coming to town, it's good to know that we have a great police force that is going to help me if I need it. And it's good to know we have wonderful parks
Mhm.
that I'm really here to visit anyway.
Sure. Which is, again, that 70-30 split is appropriate. So I'm not opposed to 70-30 split. I'm just looking where our general fund is today, looking where our tourism funds are right now. You know, $5,000 a year isn't a whole lot to
No.
do much with. So
What's the magnitude of the dollars we're expecting?
I looked at this a year ago when we were first adopting it, and I had a bunch of different scenarios out there. I think I ran 10 different scenarios depending on, it was mostly banking on the RV park coming in, which again, they haven't broken ground on yet, right? So we're all holding our breath here, right? Or hopefully not holding our breath. But I think based on, we did some assumptions on occupancy levels, how many of those were going to be longer term stays, how many of those were going to be monthly stays,
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
and what their occupancy was, how successful it was, if they're 100% full during the summer or they're only 80% full during the summer, right? So I looked at all the scenarios. My numbers were a wide range. I think I was looking anywhere between 30 to up to $120,000 a year was kind of the upper magnitude of this.
Okay.
So you're not talking millions of dollars, right? But you're talking, you know, you could hit
Real money.
$100,000. Yeah, you could hit $100,000. And if you're, you know, keeping 30% of that, you're talking $30,000 project once a year geared towards tourism. That's significant.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I agree with you that I think for now it makes sense to be 100%.
Mhm. I did too. So Chris, you mentioned the 35, you referenced the 35% for social service funding, and the council determines that every year prior to the budget and so on. Would we do the same thing here then? We saying 100% this year for the tourism? Is that
Yeah,
your
just be a
idea?
revision to the policy and the council can revise their policies at a
Okay.
whim. Yeah, so you want some guiding document, but this would be one of those open spots that you can look at and review annually or as needed. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments so far?
No, but that all sounds great. I was wondering if, because you had the question, Councilor Lowe, that, well, what about that other 50%? Should we write that in there, that 50% would be at the discretion to support, at the discretion of the city to support tourism activities?
It would make it clear, and the way Chris answered the question, I get it now, but I just flashed to that and said, oh, okay, where's the other 50?
Just add some language on the third bullet point to say what's happening with the other 50%.
Yeah,
Do
that's,
you want it in the same or do you want a separate bullet point?
it could be the same. What do you think? Council Con.
Yeah, it would be fine to be the same. Or you could just phrase it as the balance to be used at the
Yeah.
discretion of the city. I have a question with respect to tourism grant application requirements. Organizations applying for social service funding. It looks like this sentence
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
included erroneously, because I thought, why couldn't a for-profit organization apply for this?
That very good catch.
Um,
Copy and paste.
So any organization can apply for this if the individuals are not eligible. I guess is the balance of this paragraph correct?
So if you're a sole proprietor, I mean, you're basically an individual, but you're a business, so.
What if someone like some random community member wanted to organize a block party for the community?
Oh, who would do that kind of thing?
That's pretty risky.
I have no idea, but what if that ever happened in the future?
Well, we could make it an annual tradition.
Yeah.
I think the intent here would be, you want to get the most bang for your buck, right? And these one-off events aren't gonna be, they're very difficult to sustain, right? And so I think when you're going with an organization, you're looking at something that's got some structure, and you're gonna have something that could be maybe more sustainable, and you're gonna get more leverage out of those funds. I think what we're trying to avoid is somebody that owns a house and, hey, if I apply and I get this funding, I can put this great mural on my fence, right? It's like, well, that's really benefiting you, and it's
Right.
really hard to make that distinction. And so just to avoid any of those one-offs, if you can get an organization to support that route, go to the Lions Club and have the Lions Club say that they want to do this project and get behind it. It's just got a little different feel to it. You pass the sniff test before you come to the council, and I think that'll help. It'll help the council not have to pick through applications that maybe aren't quite as meritorious as others.
So is the sentence I referred to, is it actually correct with the exception of the reference to social service funding?
Yeah, I think we'd want it to just be applying for tourism grant funds or tourism grant funding.
So it could be a nonprofit, a service organization, or a business.
And there's a reason to have verifiable nonprofit. I mean, with the other one, we had a 501c3, which is one thing, but I
I think
mean,
that's why I put verifiable, because it's like, depending on what it is, that verification may be different. We may not necessarily ask for it up front, but we may ask you to verify it depending on what it is. So
okay.
verifiable just means, well, not that you don't know the definition, but to me, the way it would work would be, you're a business, you state your business. If we know your business, great. If we don't know you, we may ask you to verify that you're a
Right.
business, right? So
Tax reasons.
yeah, it keeps it a little bit easier on the application. If you're selected, then we're going to come back and reflect that information. And
Okay. That sounds good. And then we referenced the budget officer being the city contact. I guess we did that with the other one. So we say budget officer as opposed to finance director. We have it.
I like finance director better because we're not doing it during budget season necessarily.
That's whatever y'all want to do. I mean, it's either one, same to me, because I am, well, yeah, you do have to watch out.
I kind of like just finance director.
Yeah, if you're gonna do that, do it on the other one too.
Do it on both.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what, wait a minute. You're supposed to do the first one through the budget process. This one, are we doing it through the budget process?
Well, it's not really through the budget process. Well, I guess the
You
individual
gotta do it
applications
somewhere.
aren't really going through the budgeting process.
Right,
The policy and how much is going to be set aside is
Mhm.
approved through the budget process, but the actual selection of the allocation of who's getting what funds, that's not you as a budget officer, that's just you as a finance director.
Right.
that's fine,
So I'd recommend we change that language.
okay.
I wonder if we should incorporate the two, I guess, attributes from the social service funding policy being incorporate practices of equity, inclusion, and diversity, and provide responsible stewardship of the land, air, and waters of Philomath. It would seem like they would apply here as well.
But I had the same observation. I think it's well known to the inclusivity committee that we should be emphasizing or at least referencing DEI through everything we do.
Yeah,
Stewardship.
it was tougher to make a little bit more of a leap to get there with social agency funding than this, but I think with the way we restructured it in the first one, it would be easier to copy that over. That would make sense there. So.
And another item I had for applicants providing organizational information, I think it'd be helpful to know just what level of expertise or success this individual group and organization has had in whatever tourism related thing they're pitching to us. 'Cause like you just said with the block party, we had an individual who had no background in it and wanted a bunch of money. Would we?
Add a bullet point for past experience and.
Yeah, and because it does speak to those examples you gave of, knowing how good an operator the person is or business is.
Okay. And maybe that's a good one to talk about. Maybe it's more specific about how the recipient has used similar funds in the previously received funds or done other work related to tourism. So maybe it's really more of an opportunity to get people to report back on what they did last time they got money. And if it's the first time, then they can report back to something else that they've done, maybe other funds they've got or other projects that they've done.
Right. So another observation I had, and maybe it's inherent in this, is, but just what, unlike the social service agency where I think we're established, what are the evaluation criteria specifically? I mean, we're asking for the information above, so we have that, but is there anything more that we would want to put in here that says, this is how we're going to rank you, or this is how we're going to select? What things?
On both of these, there's an actual application separate than just this, right? So on the application intake form, that's a great place to put how you're going to be scored. And so I can work with Chelsea on having her put some of those tables together, similar to what you do on any other grant proposal. And so we can break those out. It'll be based on these bullet points, right? It'll be based on that.
Right.
And we'll give some guidance there so that you can score them.
I did like, actually pulled from it earlier on, where we're talking about enhancement, promotion, or expansion in tourism. So those three elements, whatever they come back to us with, how would that do one of those three or more than one of those three?
I'm wondering if we should also reference the strategic plan here. Or if our strategic plan should include the expansion of tourist-related activities.
You have goal 2.3, help the economy, develop and expand Philomath tourism.
Okay, we're there.
I'm trying to take it back to the social service one. Maybe we find up in the bullet points when we first say applicants shall provide organization information that includes the following. Maybe just before there, we reference back to the strategic plan, projects, applicants and the project shall follow strategies laid out in the strategic plan. We'll at least make a reference back to the strategic plan that kind of helps. So let me look back on the social service one and see how that language is and see if just copy some of that into here.
Okay. And then I think, again, the solicitation, how do we go about getting the word out that this money's available? this is really all I have. Councillor Causey or Mayor Jones, is there anything further we need to talk about?
I think that all sounds great.
Would you like to entertain a motion?
Oh, yes. Let's see, I would like to move that we recommend to the City Council the transient lodging tax policy and grant program as amended during this committee meeting.
Second,
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
a little slow there.
So motion by Councillor Lowe, second by Councillor Causey. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion is passed.
And I'll pull it together somewhere. I'll get that out to you by email and we'll get it in front of the city council at the next meeting. Not as much rush on this one, but it seems to make sense to do it lockstep with the social service funding.
Great. Okay. All right, well, Mr. Sorte's been very patient waiting for us. So our new business agenda item is the establishment of an enterprise zone within the city of Philomath. And I'd like to turn that discussion over to Mr. Sorte, I'm sorry, Jerry Sorte. Again, Economic Development Supervisor for Corvallis-Benton County Economic Development Office.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to fumble a little bit and see if I can share my screen here and bring up my presentation.
You may have to have Ruth make you
Yeah, give them rights.
make you an assistant host. Ruth, are you tracking that? Are you able to make Jerry a co-host?
Sorry, I missed that. Just one moment.
That's okay.
Should be good.
And also, while Jerry's bringing that up, just to give him a couple seconds here. So Corvallis Philomath has a great working relationship with Corvallis-Benton County Economic Development. Jerry does a great job. Kate Portia does a great job as well. Anytime I need something, if a business comes, says, hey, we're looking for a site, I can give them a call. We go look at properties together. I can ask Jerry to go do background stuff for me. So they've been phenomenal to work with, great relationship. One of the difficulties we've run into, and Jerry will touch on this, is that when you get businesses either in Philomath that are starting to outgrow their building a little bit and starting to look around, when they start looking around, I send them to Jerry, we start looking, and it doesn't take long for that business owner to be like, wow, if I go to Corvallis, I can get this land and I can get these benefits and I can get this. If I stay in Philomath, I get to stay in Philomath, but I don't get the tax breaks, I don't get the, and so, you know, Jerry does a great job, but we put ourselves a little bit of a disadvantage in not having the same types of benefits that are being offered to businesses in the rest of Benton County, specifically City of Corvallis and other areas. So that's really on the enterprise zone. I won't steal all the thunder, but that's really what we're talking about here, is trying to get us on a little bit more level playing field. Not necessarily with the entire state as a whole, although there are many, many enterprise zones throughout the state that do compete for those businesses. But even within Benton County, we've just got to get on a little bit more even footing with our neighbors. And it'll help Jerry and Kate to be able to do their job in helping businesses in Philomath stay in Philomath and grow here, and even look to recruiting businesses. And it's like, hey, you can go to any of these sites, you're going to get the same benefits.
Right.
And right now, that's not the case. They have to kind of distinguish, well, in these sites, you get these benefits, and Philomath, yeah, they don't really get them. Right? You just got to work with Chris, and you got to work with the great city council, but you don't get these other benefits. So that's kind of what we'll go through. I'm going to leave it to Jerry to talk through kind of basics, enterprise zone, and I'm still in this thunder already. So I'm just going to go ahead and let Jerry take this part.
Take the thunder for sure.
So do all of the surrounding communities have enterprise zones?
I would say it's very common. And then, yeah, just background, Jerry Sorte, Corvallis, Benton County Economic Development. We're based out of the city of Corvallis, but we have a contract with Benton County, and really happy to be able to work across county lines, work with the city of Philomath, work across Benton County. And I can talk and just answer questions as we go. We can make this as informal as you like. I'm fumbling a little bit with technology, so if anybody can't hear me or if we're having any sort of troubles, just please let me know. But to answer your question, I would say it's very common. So our office acts as the zone manager for the Benton-Corvallis Enterprise Zone, and there are 3 kind of distinct areas of that. HP campus is one, so there's Sunset Research Way, and then the Airport Industrial Park. Before I came to work for Corvallis-Benton County Economic Development, I worked for the city of Sweet Home and was involved with the reestablishment of the enterprise zone there. They're throughout Lynn County, Benton County, a pretty common tool. So I would say, yeah, it's a common tool. And if you're ever interested in looking at the other enterprise zones that are available, they're all mapped through the state's website. You can take a look at that as well.
How long have you been with Corvallis?
I think it's like 3.5 years now. But I'm a local that thought, hey, let's come back to where we grew up. So I grew up in Corvallis, and I'm happy to be back working in this region.
Cool.
So the way that what I would kind of preface and say about the enterprise zone is a state program that can be utilized at the local level. So when I talk about the enterprise zone, I'm really talking about some of the requirements and opportunities that are allowed under the state rules. So our office is helping with this administrative aspect of this process, but they're really like public policy questions here. And so, those questions include, should the city of Philomath sponsor an enterprise zone? If the questions keep moving forward, there's the decision of whether the enterprise zone should allow hotel, motel, resort businesses to be eligible under this program. And then also I'll talk about sponsor roles, would need to determine who a zone manager would be. And those are really like the main questions. But what an enterprise zone does is it provides an incentive, temporary tax break for investments that create jobs. And included in the packet was the state guidebook, which provides some of those requirements, but only certain types of businesses are eligible. And I'll kind of jump into that next, talk about the office. Only certain types of businesses are available. These are typically businesses that are producing something, manufacturers, processors, shippers, call centers, and so forth. And qualified projects include new buildings or structures, equipment, significant equipment, and certain investments are not eligible, including retail, and I think just land taxation is not included in the program.
And what's the basis for excluding those particular functions?
Yeah, I would say that was a public policy decision that was made at the state level at some point. So I think the idea is that, well, you have land, the land's there. We're trying to provide an incentive for new construction, for new development that's going to bring jobs. I think the intention is trying to require an investment in order to provide those tax breaks. So, included in the packet, business has got to increase its employment by at least 10% or at least one job. So there's got to be some job creation that occurs, and that job needs to be maintained during the duration of the time when the business receives this tax abatement.
Is there any restriction in terms of commercial versus industrial property or zoning involved with this?
So when we look at the map, one of the reasons why I think the map should be broad is that it's not specific to the zoning, but it is specific to what the investment is for. And so I think one reason that you might include commercial zoning, at least in my mind, is that I think we're starting to see kind of this mix with small scale industrial happening in commercial areas. A good example of that is your brewery that brews beer on site and then also has a commercial component, kind of a mixed component. So I think that there may be instances where someone may want to apply to use enterprise zone in a commercial zone. So maybe jumping ahead, let's see how close we are. Yeah, here we go. It's a good lead in. One of the requirements under the state program is that in order to have an enterprise zone, the geographical area has to meet certain economic requirements. And so one of those is you could, if the per capita income is 80% or less than the state average, then you can apply to have an enterprise zone. I worked with Art Fish at Business Oregon to look at, he looked at just the full city of Philomath city limits, and the city as a sum does not meet the economic requirements. The income levels are too high, but when you pull out certain census blocks, there are certain census areas that do meet the requirements when aggregated. And so I highlighted here, there are 4 census blocks that have, when they're aggregated, fall under the 80% of per capita income in the state. And when you take those census blocks and like overlay it on the city of Philomath city limits here, you get the shaded red area. So that's why this shaded red area includes, it includes a lot of your residentially zoned property, publicly zoned property, area that may not ever have a business that applies under the enterprise zone. But this is kind of like the maximum area that could be used to create an enterprise zone. Again, a contrast is when I was at City of Sweet Home, we just designated the entire city because it was just easier to do that, just to call out the entire city, but we knew that investment was primarily going to occur in our industrial lands, maybe in some commercial areas. So I think that the map that is in front of you here, that is as large as the enterprise zone could be to meet the economic requirements under state rules. At least from my perspective, I don't know that there's a downside that I could see in terms of having it larger than what you might need, because ultimately a business that would apply under the enterprise zone would need to meet the business requirements, need to meet the investment requirements as well. So just wanted to put this out in front of you. My read on this, looking at this, is the areas that are not included, kind of the northwest and to the east, these areas, they're residentially zoned property. The enterprise zone, as it's mapped here, if the city would like to move forward with this, would include all industrial zoned land in the city limits.
Obviously that it also includes a great deal of residential area. Is there a disadvantage to including residential areas in the enterprise zone?
In my mind, I personally can't think of a reason. I'll have to confirm with the state what they require in the ultimate submission, but I think it's, you just get this long list of tax lots that you submit to them, and it's probably, it's just not a long list, but ultimately your zoning, your city zoning will dictate the type of land use that's permitted there, not the enterprise zone status. So it's just unlikely that you would have anyone in the residential zone area come and apply under the enterprise zone. I guess one benefit of having there is it could allow you flexibilities if in the future something were to change with a designation of some of those lands. Again, I think it could be pared down if there was interest in doing that. Sure, we certainly could adjust the map to be more targeted. So that's a decision for.
If, for example, I wanted to start a business in my home where I'm manufacturing some small thing, and I create an additional job or two, then I could apply for this, correct?
It's possible that it could apply. Yeah. So I'm not intimately familiar with city of Philomath zoning, but if you had a cottage industry or a home occupation standard that did allow that, there may be a possibility. Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Because it seems to me like conceptually, this is really designed to help the kind of industrial enterprises that you described. Another Lyrica or something.
Yeah, I think, in the Benton Corvallis zone, Past recipients have been Two Towns Cider, like kind of larger manufacturers, Forest Spirits Distilleries, some of the food beverage focused industries have been past recipients. So they typically are larger.
Yeah, it just seems to me that the areas that you mentioned in and around Corvallis, that those were more focused areas where there's more open area for businesses like that to develop.
Jerry, is it fair to say, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just saying, in terms of taxing, if you pared down the zone, does that have any influence on the tax issue and working with other taxing districts?
In my mind, it does not. So ultimately, if a because you'd have to approve an application for a business to receive this tax abatement, and they would have to show that they're an eligible business making an eligible investment. And I think the minimum investment is $50,000. So they'd have to be at least purchasing $50,000 worth of equipment or
There you go.
construction.
Yeah, rules me out.
Yeah.
Her side business is up. Okay with that.
Talk with our office.
Jerry, is it fair
Yeah.
to say that just using the census tract really just simplifies our process of qualifying and presenting to
Yeah.
the state? Like, we're gonna use these census tracts. Here's our we qualified based on these tracts and moving forward. If we start trying to shave off residential areas and everything, now we're starting to make exceptions to census tracts and having to run the data differently. And I mean, is that fair? That just complicates the application a little bit?
I think that, like, for me as someone who is trying to present like the city, kind of all of your options, I wanted to provide something that was essentially those census blocks located within the city limits. So it's like an easy thing to explain. I think that you probably could come and shave off areas. I think it just might slow the process down a little bit. I think that they could theoretically be approved, to be honest, as long as it's within this area. It does not expand beyond this area. This to me was just something that was fairly easy to explain. These 4 census blocks located within the city limits of Philomath.
Does this include the Boulevard property?
No, Boulevard is east of us. Oh, no, it kind of jolts over. Well, I'm looking at, yeah, it's the square to the far right there.
That one maybe.
Yeah, okay.
So if I can navigate away from the map briefly here, there's really, I would say, 2 types of abatement that would occur if the city of Philomath establishes an enterprise zone. The standard tax abatement is this 3-year abatement, and it would be something that would have a ministerial non-discretionary review if a business came in. What would happen is the zone manager would review business, determine if they have an eligible type of investment, if they're an eligible business, and would make essentially a decision at that point, just reviewing and checking the boxes. So that's what the standard tax abatement is. It lasts for 3 years. Again, the concept here is to provide an incentive, provide 3 years of relief with the understanding, hope, assumption that investment will be around beyond the 3 years, that will bring jobs, and then bring funds in through the tax system that might not otherwise have occurred. And there's more details again in the state guide that was included in your packet. The 5-year abatement has additional requirements to it. There is a wage requirement that's required of the business. If they're going to apply for 5 years, they need to indicate at the very beginning of the process that they're seeking up to a 5-year approval. They've got the wage requirement has to be at least 150% of the county average wage, and the state keeps us informed of what those levels are, and I've got what currently 150% is listed at right now. The city could can make reasonable requests for additional requirements of the business. And we'd have to kind of think about what that might be at some point. Our office, just to be open and transparent, is investigating whether we can have some sort of community service fee to pay for the administrative costs with the program in this. It would be, I would assume, a small fee that would cover a small amount of administrative costs. But that would allow tax abatement up to 5 years. Again, these particular requirements that you see up here on this slide are not required. They're for the 3-year abatement. These are a little bit higher standard if a business were to apply for 4 or 5-year abatement.
I apologize if this information is in a more detailed document. I didn't have an opportunity to review that, but on your prior page, you indicate they need to enter into a first source agreement with local job training providers. Can you give an example of those providers?
Yeah, let me see that. I was looking at that just a little bit earlier today. But my understanding is that it doesn't require that the business hire any particular person or group, but to be in contact with the local employment department programs, advertise jobs through them, make those jobs available or advertise so that people can see them. Check because I did see that. So why don't I look into that and get right back to you?
Okay. On the current page you're on, it refers to a local zone sponsor. Who's the local zone sponsor?
This would be the city of Philomath.
Okay.
Yeah. And let me pull up some other notes that I had because I wanted to just include that. There's a sponsor packet as well, which I did not include in your packet, but it talks generally about what the sponsor roles are. So the sponsor needs to appoint a local zone manager. The local zone manager for the Benton-Corvallis zone is Kate Porsche, Economic Development Manager, my boss, through our office. She would be available, our office would be available again. If the city of Philomath chose to use our services, it's kind of all included in our contract with the county, and we would love to help promote this enterprise zone. One of the things that the enterprise zone manager does is to help market the enterprise zone, assist the county assessor at any time. Let's see, essentially facilitate eligible business firms in acquiring publicly owned real estate that is unused, undedicated, or suitably zoned. There's an interesting part, and I'm learning more about this in the state rules, that says that, like, if the city of Philomath owned land that was not slated for some other use, or the state did, then we'd help to market that property as well. I haven't seen that, having worked for municipalities, I haven't seen land that's just like hanging out there, not slated for any particular use. But that is something that comes up when you look at the role of the zone sponsor. Adopt resolutions associated with this. So if there was a business that came in and applied for the 4 or 5 year abatement, there would need to be a resolution that's approved through the city of Philomath that would go in front of the Philomath City Council. Again, our office, if we were a zone sponsor working with Chris, working with others, would be able to help draft that resolution, kind of understand what the business is looking for, but the city of Philomath would ultimately need to approve that resolution or not approve that resolution.
And your office would approve the standard abatement, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And the enterprise zone boundary can be potentially changed or terminated prematurely. There's some stipulations around that. And a designation that if the zone sponsor, in this case, the city would have to make a decision just if they'd like to include hotel resort businesses to allow to be eligible under this program as well.
And what would be the basis for that decision? I'm sorry. What would be the basis for including or excluding those businesses?
Hotel resorts.
Yeah.
I think it's just a straight public policy decision, to be honest. I mean, if tourism is a focus, if it's something that you'd like to encourage, and you can include that. I remember, I believe we did when I was at Sweet Home, and many other sponsoring groups have done that as well.
Thank you.
So just sort of a question on the criteria for wages and benefits and so on that this business would bring in. So when we talk about average, are we using the mean average as opposed to like?
This is average, it's not median.
It's not mean,
Yeah.
okay, it is average, okay.
Yeah.
So, because a new employee could be the owner or highly paid executive. So I mean, if you had somebody making 500,000 a year and somebody else is making, the other employees are 30,000, it's going to skew that average. I mean, seems to be what I'm saying. If
I believe that, okay, the average of new employees, that's a great question. And I can look into that because it says, because there's kind of this other component where the wages must be greater than or equal to the current county average wage in the
Right.
fourth or fifth year. Yeah, I could look into that because I don't know that I have an answer to that. If it could be skewed by someone that's very highly paid.
yeah, I think it's the idea you're trying to sell them.
Yeah.
Great living wage jobs coming in, and you've got
Yeah.
one highly paid person. Everybody else is $14
That's a
an
good
hour.
question.
Is there for an existing business or a business and the RV park that's coming into town comes to mind, a business that is currently being built out, but is not fully built out? Could a phase of that business apply for this, or could it, even though the business started before the enterprise zone was established, could it apply?
I think we probably have to look at the specifics of that because one of the requirements is that they apply before they start to make their investment. So we'd have to probably look at that on a case-by-case basis, and that's something we can consult with the state on. It's possible that there could be multiple phases to their development, and one of the other phases may be able to apply. So I think that's something that we would want to probably learn more about and get some guidance.
But if you had an existing business, say like Interfor here in town,
Yeah.
in the mill, and they were looking at a substantial
Yes.
investment to increase, and it was gonna add jobs and everything else, then, in that case, yeah, they're an existing business, but what they're looking at is an expansion and an investment. The criteria is they need to contact and let us know ahead of time, right? You can't get into, well, we've already spent $500,000 into here, we're gonna spend another $2 million, but now we want to apply. You're already kind of into the game, but if they approach it early enough, then that would typically qualify.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of the enterprise zone generally is the businesses that you do have. It would provide an incentive for them to expand here locally to make that investment here. That would be one benefit of the enterprise zone.
Okay. I believe your materials said that the enterprise zones generally exist for 11 to 15 years, something like that.
Yeah, I would say it's about 10 years. There's some state language that it's like it can be no more than 11 years. It's some interesting state language there. So it's 10 to 11 years is how
Okay.
we line up. Yeah.
Okay.
They can be terminated early. I think there's the state rules say that if you do terminate early, you can't come back again. The city couldn't come back again to establish an enterprise zone for at least 10 years. But you can change zone boundaries. So like at that 10-year mark, and that's an opportunity to think about what the zone boundaries, if it's what we like, if it should be like theoretically, if there were annexations that occurred. I mean, we'd have to look, but my assumption is it should be able to expand the boundary as well to include those properties.
So then you could potentially, the enterprise zone could exist beyond 10 years if it were changed.
And it could change in the same fashion, like you get to that 10-year mark, again, I'm using the city of Sweet Home as an example because I work there and help with that process, but we just essentially kept it going for an additional 10 years in the same configuration that it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The other enterprise zones in the area, would they have any advantages that we would not have if we establish this enterprise?
Well, I'm trying to think, and can't think of any. I mean, any jurisdiction can include local incentives, but those are really out, in my mind, those are outside of what an enterprise zone is, like SDC waivers or something like that. But those are separate decisions, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
I would say the enterprise zone is pretty standard. There's an opportunity with urban zones, so this would technically be a rural zone. There is the ability at the urban enterprise zone level to have additional requirements. So in the Benton Corvallis zone, there are the sustainability requirements that we apply to all businesses applying under the zone, where we look at whether they're using green building practices and so forth. So like technically not everything could or will get approved for the 3-year program.
Mhm.
That's a little bit different than the rural enterprise zone, where it's a pretty cut and dry criteria for whether they would apply to the 3-year program.
Mhm.
Mayor Jones, do you have anything that you'd like to ask?
No, I find it all very, very exciting. It seems to me that a lot of the systems that are in place for other areas in this region are going to be very applicable to ours. And so I'm feeling pretty comfortable with what's being presented.
Assuming that council were to approve this, how long would it take to establish it?
I believe that it applies at the time of resolution.
Oh, okay.
So it's a fairly immediate thing.
Okay, thank you.
Jerry, maybe you could just talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
what that process is between here and
Yeah.
resolution, as far as reaching out to other taxing entities and all
Thank
that.
you.
Just go through that process a little bit.
Yeah, so we scheduled a meeting with the taxing districts, and this is part of the state process requirement. Sent out notice for that earlier in the month, have a meeting in this room on Friday. I believe it's at 1:30 with the taxing
Oh,
districts.
yes.
Where we've invited representatives from those districts to attend and ask questions. Essentially what we would do is share whatever direction we receive from this committee today, talk about the map, talk about the process, gathering feedback, and compile all of that. Assuming this moves forward to a city council agenda item, we would package all of that and present that to the city council. But it's meant to be a time to receive information, share information, and then we can compile those minutes and feedback and provide that to the Philomath City Council.
Are you looking for a recommendation then, or imprimatur stamp or something from us to?
Yeah, I'd like to, again, vet it out, get some questions. I'd like to get it in front of the council sooner than later. We were a little, I would say premature, but proactive and reaching out to the districts already. I feel pretty strongly that this is a good way for the city to go. And it's really, I guess I'll say two things. One, if the difference between a business coming to Philomath and not coming to Philomath is this 3-year tax abatement on the improvements, I don't know that I'm that interested in that type of business coming to town if they're that tight of a shoelace that, this is make or break it for them.
Mhm.
And so, it can't be the type of incentive where like, well, if not for that, we never would have made it in Philomath, right?
Right.
But I think at the same time, it serves as a welcome sign. It's the map that goes out there, and it can be fairly significant depending on the size of the investment. 3 years of tax abatement on those improvements can be fairly substantial.
Mhm.
And so I don't want to minimize it, but at the same time, this isn't the silver bullet that's now once we get to the place, all the businesses are just going to come to Philomath, right? I just think, again, as I said in my opening remarks, I think this puts us on a more level playing field within Benton County with our immediate neighbors. It puts us on a more even playing field with other areas that are attracting a lot of industry right now. And I think of like Transient, I think of Albany, I think of some of these areas, smaller towns, and they're pulling these businesses in because they've got some of these incentives as well as some other incentives that would be more difficult. But I just think it puts us on more level playing field. It shows that we're welcoming and we're taking proactive steps to try to recruit businesses to come to Philomath. It's one thing for us to say, yeah, go talk to the city manager. He's a real nice guy and he'll be very helpful and we'll process your application quickly. It's another thing to say all that, oh, and we've got an enterprise zone set up and we've got professional managers that are overseeing that. And if you submit your application, you're going to get approved. It's a very cut and dry process for them. If these are your investments and this is your type of firm, you're going to get approved and you have 3 years of tax abatement for those investments. That can be very huge for the right business, right? The other message, and kind of my second point that this brings that I want to really emphasize is our existing businesses. This may be that incentive that they are waiting for to make that next step and to make that next investment, where otherwise they may just continue status quo, right? But I know we have businesses in town that have talked to me about making that type of investment, whether it be a new building or new equipment, make that move. Some of those businesses I've been talking to since I got here 8 years ago, and they've yet to pull the trigger on something like that. This could be that push. This could be that nudge, right? To really have them go out and take that, knowing that they can get in the 3 years or 5 years. That could really make a big difference for them. Those local businesses that are looking to upsize or to grow, and they want to stay in Philomath. They don't want to have to move to Corvallis. They don't want to have to go to Tangent. They'd like to stay here. They'd like to stay where they can if they could just expand. And this tax abatement may really help them get there. So I do see it as a huge benefit for existing businesses in town, not just swinging at the fence trying to get some big new business to come to town. That's really not focus.
So so STCs and other things that we have in place, those continue, right?
Yes.
That there's no.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, that's it. I wanted to know. Councilor Cosby, please.
I know there will be those who will be concerned that this could attract businesses that we don't particularly want in Philomath. So I'm assuming that any restrictions that are written into the code would continue to apply.
Good question.
That, whatever that business might be, that they would undergo the same scrutiny they would otherwise, with or without an enterprise zone.
That's correct. Yes. So again, the small distinction there would be like the hotel resort. But again, if it's not allowed in the zoning, it's not going to be allowed whether there's an enterprise zone there or not. It may be less desirable to come if we exclude hotel resorts from this, right? Then it's like, well, maybe we are going to look at Corvallis or someplace else because they have those. It's, I guess, just for perspective, and Jerry deals with this every day. I get emails throughout the month, hey, there's a business, they're looking for a town in Philomath, they want to relocate. Please reply if you've got X amount of acreage, what types of tax abatements you have in place, what kind of incentives you have in place. It's like down the list of the punch list of things that they're looking for. And it's like trying to find a date. There's just some, it's like, yeah, doesn't meet, nah, doesn't meet. And so if you get 20 responses of all these different communities and half of them have enterprise zones and the other half don't, it's real easy to just exclude those half that don't and look at the 10 that do, right? And so right now we're in the 10 that don't. We just get excluded from the initial look and they don't even look at us further. Why? When you've got all these other cities that do have enterprise zones, that do offer these benefits, and you're going to focus your attention there. So again, we just want to be on this level playing field. We want to at least be in the consideration. And right now, we get considered for other reasons. We get considered because they like the town. There's a personal connection here. They grew up here. They know somebody who's doing business here. And those are great. Those aren't going to go away, right? If anything, this is just going to add to that. So we don't want that to go away, but we also want people that maybe don't know about Philomath yet to give us a look, because now we're on the same playing field as others in our region.
Are there any ways to utilize this sort of opportunity in order to direct or attract businesses that are ones that we would prioritize bringing to town, maybe like a grocery store?
I don't think this would be the tool to do that. I think we would look at other city incentives. I mean, we could talk about not necessarily waiving, but the city could look at city payments towards SDCs or other development costs to incentivize. But because this is run at the state level, we're a little hands off on more specific criteria. Jerry mentioned the urban enterprise zones are allowed to add some additional provisions in there to target things a little bit more. We won't have that ability because we're rural. So we're a little bit more limited. This may not be the best tool for that, Mayor.
Yeah.
So kind of along that line, looking at eligibility, retail is mentioned as not being eligible. So
That's right.
retail being a store,
Yeah.
a grocery store,
Yeah, that's correct.
hardware store would not be. But at the hardware store or the grocery store, they were building a new building, but because they are retail, then they're not eligible. That's what
correct.
we're saying. Okay.
That's correct.
A bank, financial institution, somebody wants to build a new bank here, would that
I do not believe that would be.
financial?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why those are excluded, that type of business? Maybe you mentioned it, I spaced it out.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry if I did.
That's all right.
again, I'm speculating now as to the public policy objectives of the state at the time, but like economic development traditionally has been focused towards traded sector, right? And so like traded sector being operations that bring money in from the outside. So like the most, the basic example of that is selling something, manufacturing something and selling it outside of the area where there's a market for it and bringing money in. So if I were, again, I'm speculating now at what the state policy objective is, but I think it's that. I would love to continue conversations about grocery stores, like in other capacities, because I think that we're all kind of talking about economic development in maybe new ways now beyond just simply attracting traded or maintaining traded sector businesses, although retaining who we have tends to be a core focus of our office, is trying to help those who are here expand and grow business retention and expansion. But love to continue the grocery store discussion in other capacity.
There's a little gray space between economic development and community development, and that's where some of your retail commercial activity falls. Is it good for the economy? Yes. Is it traded sector bringing new dollars into the economy? No.
Okay.
But do we want to lose that retail shop? No.
No.
But do we want to use traded sector funds to support it? No, because again, you're talking retail jobs are typically lower wage. They're not, So there's a lot of things that play into why the state and the city is really trying to target these traded sector businesses as opposed to retail.
Thank you. That helps. And I apologize if you covered it before.
No,
We
it's a
covered
good
it more
conversation.
extensively. It's a
Yeah.
great question.
Economic
you.
development practitioners have that debate, I think, ongoing, right? Because there is this gray area, especially when you get a business that's doing both, right?
Yeah.
And so it can be gray.
Okay.
I will just mention to Jerry that I'd love to have him come back and chat about grocery stores, or we can go out for lunch sometime.
I would look forward to that, absolutely.
Perfect.
So for tonight, I think what we're looking for is just, it'd be nice to get at least a consensus to bring this forward to the city council as Jerry's presented it. We can do a little bit of work on finding some answers to the specific question Councilor Kazi had. I want to massage this map conversation a little bit with Jerry as well. I'm concerned about a few of these areas outside of city limits, inside of a growth boundary that within the next 10 years could pretty easily come inside of city limits. And so, we'll massage that conversation a little bit, but if this committee is comfortable with it, again, I'd like to get this on the agenda for the city council to take a look at it and talk about next steps on moving this forward. I think it puts us on the map, on a map that we're not currently on. And I think that's an important aspect. The big argument against this is, are you losing out on money, leaving money on the table that's already coming, right? Like what businesses are already coming to Philomath without this incentive in place, right? And we can point to great examples of businesses looking at Philomath, doing development in Philomath with this not on the table, and we're going to collect 3 years of taxes from them that if this is in place, we otherwise wouldn't get, right?
Right.
So in the short term, I think that's a good argument. Long term, I still think those businesses, you give them this incentive now, they're able to save that money now, the money they're not paying in taxes. What are they doing with it? They're not putting it in their pocket. They're investing that money back into their business, back into the community. They're expanding their businesses, and you'll still see that growth and that development. I think long term, that still makes for a healthier economy for the city, even though we've already quote unquote lured them to Philomath, or they're already here in Philomath, right? So this really still in the long term does benefit Philomath. It's never been about, enterprise zones to me have never been about trying to attract the big mothership to come and land here in Philomath. It's really about how do we help incentivize continued and new investment into Philomath from our businesses, and the enterprise does that. Not having to, continuing to not have it continues to put us at a disadvantage.
Okay.
So if I've got consensus, then we'll just bring this to the
Yes.
council.
I would.
Yeah, I believe we have consensus.
Chaz, you have your thumbs up.
That was a hand, but basically, yes, I'm making sense.
Could you tell me who will be present on Friday? You said the taxing agencies.
Yeah, I sent a notice to the taxing districts, to the county, city, of course, it's whoever would like to attend as well. I'll be there to present and answer questions.
Okay. Will you be giving them pretty much the same presentation?
Yeah, if the past is any guide, they tend not to be really large crowds, so we'll probably just have an informal discussion and look at like a map, and we can talk about if there's potential changes to the map that we might be thinking about. But yeah, I'll be here to answer questions and kind of go through just the same material.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good.
And then that feedback will come to the council as well.
Mhm.
We had the map, the taxing districts, here were some concerns that were talked about.
Mhm.
So that'll all come back by the
Yeah.
time we come to the council again.
And the questions that were brought up in terms of the average wage for the 4th and 5th year abatement, we can dial in and get some answers to those questions as well.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Well, we've got a consensus. We're ready to move forward. Appreciate your being here and giving us some good clarity on what this is looking at. And hopefully
you
we'll
for
go
having me.
forward. No,
Appreciate
thank you, Jerry. Great. I'm not sure. I don't think we have any other business. Mr. Mayor, anything on your docket?
Nope, I think everything's good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, Councilor Causey?
Nothing for me. Thank you.
And Chris?
Well, this is the first public meeting we've had since Monday's event, and so I'll just say kudos to Mayor Jones.
Yes.
And appreciate the city council as well for stepping up and doing the nice memorial. As nice as the day was, the memorial aspect of that was really, really heartfelt and really nice. So kudos to Mayor Jones. I think Mayor Neiman had a hand in that, and the city council members who were able to do those readings and participate. I thought the memorial service was really, really well done, very appropriate. And then great band, great entertainment, nice job pulling all that together. So nice job, Mayor Jones. Congratulations on a great event, and look forward to next year's.
Thank you very much. I was, yeah, I'll take the moment, and I also, I was going to mention this during the next council meeting, but it ends up that I am not going to be able to attend. So I'll just mention that Chris put a lot of work into it as well. And I really am thankful for, helping me out with the frolic, but then just the personal time that you put in. I'm really appreciative of that. And all the other volunteers. Teresa Nielsen is the one who landed both of the food carts. When I was at capacity, she stepped up and she reached out, and I really appreciate that as well. So it was a lot of work on my part, but it was and Johanna, but it was also a number of other folks that put a lot of effort in Lyrica. So really thankful for the frolic and Lyrica and all those volunteers that helped out. And then I'm thinking about putting out a call for volunteers to help plan next year's event right now.
Now's the time to do
Yeah.
it. Well, everybody's
We are the city of volunteers.
We are.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaz. Great job. All right. Well, with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.